Welcome back for both viewers of this channel and Udemy students, and I'm going to be adding this to the Udemy playlist and alerting students. One of the things that I've seen a lot get asked, and I've been asked this quite a bit, is about logging errors. And one of the preferred approaches that developers have when they stumble across an error is to just log it to a file or to a table. And that is not necessarily wrong depending on the next step. What I would encourage all developers to do alongside potentially logging, and maybe that's what you want to do is log it to a file or to a table, is think about what is going to happen if there is a failure. Now, a failure in this case, I'm going to define it as the transaction may fail, or some type of tests that validate the transaction fail, such as running an update script and then running a test script after the update script to validate whether the update script values were valid or not. By the way, in general, one of the things that I'll really quickly suggest students and everyone is that if you ever run some type of script that is changing data in any way, shape, or form, I would definitely start the transaction with some type of begin tran, run the transaction, run a test after it before committing, so that the test passes. In the least, even if the test was written wrong or whatnot, it does make you, if you submit what happened, let's say there was a failure, it is very different to look at a failure, let's say from an executive position, and say, okay, so basically you ran a delete statement and then that was it, versus you ran a delete statement and then you ran a validation for the delete statement. Because even if you make an error, you look a lot more competent if you did some type of check before committing the transaction. Just think about that, how that looks if somebody else is looking at that. And I've been in those environments where somebody just goes in and hits delete and they're like, oh, I forgot the where clause. See? The validation or the test or the validation after the statement, whether it's an insert, an update, or delete, the purpose of that validation is to kind of raise your consciousness about what you're doing so you don't forget something that's important. But either way, that's going to look very different. So let's suppose that we do see a failure. Now, it's true that we may see the failure in the file, we may see the failure in the table. What's the next step that we're going to do? Now, maybe we don't do anything, right? It may be that we have to tell an appropriate team. It may be that let's say the update runs and we have to test the changes again because maybe our test wasn't good. Maybe the update was actually legitimate, but the test wasn't good. We may roll all the changes back, or we may roll some of the changes back. Okay. In some cases and in some environments, the next step is going to be automatic, right? In some environments, it's going to be something where, we are going to log it to a table or to a file because that's what's going to be needed, and then we may have to look at it, okay? So I'm going to do a couple of scenarios here, and the answer to these scenarios is it depends, right? It's not a hard and fast rule because it will depend on the environment we're in. But suppose we have a T-SQL transaction that updates 3 rows, it fails, so it doesn't update the 3 rows. Is logging the error to a table or file the most appropriate action here? It may be, right? The team may be away, the team may be, they may regularly look at the failure table or the failure log file, and so they'll know from there. It's entirely possible, though, that that's not something that we would want to do. If it fails, let's say on 3 rows, we may have an immediate alert sent to the team instead of saving it to a file or to a table. We may have an alert that goes out to a team. One of the environments I know that involved it was ETL, but it involved loaders. If a loader failed, it didn't log it to a file. It immediately alerted this loader failed, and the reason is because somebody had to solve it as soon as possible. It took forever. Okay. Another scenario here: suppose that we have a T-SQL transaction that updates 3 rows. Okay, and then the test to validate the data failed. So it updates the 3 rows, but people went ahead and committed it, and this is very popular. You'll see this a lot in your career, where somebody just throws out a delete or an insert and update, nothing to validate it at all afterwards before committing. So they commit it, and we find out the data are bad, right? Now, in some environments, what we want to do is we want to log that error. We may send an alert about the error. But there are a few environments that the way that the rules work is that if any failure occurs, we are going to immediately run a rollback script. So every single, let's say, change script that's run, let's say it's an update, an insert, or delete, there's going to be a rollback script in place. And so that rollback script gets run immediately, I mean. Okay. In that case, we may continue logging. We may not log. We may run rollback script, and we may notify, hey, the rollback script was run, which is law of deduction. Then that means the transaction failed. Okay. So it depends. The point being here is that when people ask about logging errors, that is something that can be very useful in tables or files. That can be very helpful, especially for like sending out email alerts or whatnot. But just think about the next step if you're in the environment that or if you're the developer that is going to be working on the next step. The other thing as well is think about any type of transaction, especially in ETL. The bigger the environment, the more costly a change transaction is, how you can validate that before you commit that change. But this will help you a lot, because one of the things that you can do is it's not that you're replacing logging, but if the next step is, for instance, to automatically roll back or to send an alert to yourself, and it may be you that you're sending it to, you can solve the problem faster and then minimize the amount of just data that you collect that you may never need. Now, you may need that logging data just for, let's say, audit purposes, or you may need that for some other purpose, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Sometimes logging errors or just logging things for logging things ends up leading to a lot of data accumulation that then, for whatever reason, I don't know why this occurs with developers, but they just get to where they can't remove it, even though they're not using it and they're not doing anything with that. So just keep that in the back of your mind.